demons, right, fire, brimstone, the whole shebang.
Yeah, the classic image.
But the stuff you dug up for this deep dive, it's way more than just spooky stories.
It really gets into how this idea of a demon, like the ultimate evil, it's everywhere. In stories, sure, but also how we see the world, even today.
And that's kind of a trip when you think about it.
Absolutely.
So where do we even start with this? I mean, demons have been around forever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking ancient civilizations all the way to, well, now.
Mesopotamia, right?
Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, medieval Europe, you name it. Pretty much every culture has its own version of demons, these beings lurking in the shadows.
So always about this battle between good and evil. Or was it, like, blurrier back then?
It's interesting. The sources I looked at, they suggest a more complex picture.
Really? How so?
Well, demons, they weren't always seen as purely evil. More like they were these powerful beings, had their own motivations, desires even, and often they were kind of intertwined with the human world, not just totally separate.
So not like always the big bad.
Exactly. Like, think about trickster spirits or demons who, like, offer forbidden knowledge. Dangerous, sure, but not exactly evil in the, like, mustache-twirling villain sense.
Right. More about temptation, getting in over your head.
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. Straying from the righteous path, the dangers of, like, messing with forces you don't understand.
Which definitely lead to some bad stuff.
Oh, for sure. But as these stories evolved, things started to change.
How so?
Well, the demon, it became this simplified figure, like the embodiment of pure evil, the antagonist lurking in the shadows. Good versus evil, very black and white.
Makes sense for a scary story, I guess.
Right. Easier to tell.
But, like, less nuance.
Exactly. And that's where things get a little, well, complicated. Because that simplification, that black and white thinking, it spilled over into the real world. And that's when things get really messy.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, when we reduce everything to good versus evil, us versus them, it's way too easy to demonize the people we disagree with.
Like, those people are different, so they must be bad.
Exactly. And it's dangerous thinking. Historically, this kind of thinking has been used to justify some truly awful things. Persecution, even genocide.
Because if someone's a demon, they're not really human anymore.
Right. You take away their humanity, it's easier to dismiss their perspectives, to justify doing bad things to them.
And it's not just history, is it?
Sadly, no. We're seeing echoes of this even today. Think about how certain groups are portrayed in the media. Online hate speech. It's like we haven't learned from the past.
No kidding. So how do we break out of this cycle? If the default for demon is pure evil, how do we, like, complicate that narrative? Because it seems like we need to, especially with how easily we slap that label on things we don't like in the real world.
Well, one way is to look at how the demon archetype itself has evolved. It's not all fire and brimstone anymore. Even in fiction, we see demons who defy easy categorization.
You're talking about, like, the different types of demons you mentioned earlier, the ones who aren't just straight up villains.
Exactly. Yeah, like, you've got your classic demon, sure, but then it gets interesting.
Interesting how?
Well, take the reformed demon, for example. So you've got this being, right, once upon a time, all about the darkness.
Okay, classic demon start.
But now, trying to make amends. Fighting their own nature, trying to be better.
That's got to be tough.
Oh, for sure. And they face so much suspicion, constantly having to prove themselves. It's a really powerful metaphor when you think about it.
For what?
Well, for overcoming stigma, right? Like getting a second chance, even when people don't think you deserve it.
Makes you think about how quick we are to judge in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do we give people second chances, or do we hold on to that demon label forever?
Right, even if they've changed.
Totally. And then there's this other type, the helpful demon.
Helpful demon. Now that's a curveball.
Right. But think about it. They might look scary, intimidating, all that.
Classic demon vibes.
Exactly. But deep down, they actually want to help. They might offer guidance, protection, even do acts of kindness.
They're still a demon, right?
That's the thing. Their motives are always questioned because of how they look, where they come from.
Like, don't trust a demon no matter what.
Exactly. But it makes you wonder how much of that distrust is, like, earned versus just our own baggage. You know what I mean?
Like our own prejudices about what a demon should be.
Exactly. And that's such a human thing, isn't it? Judging based on appearances, first impressions, instead of actual character.
Like, we do that all the time with people we meet, groups we don't understand.
All the time. And then there's the rebellious demon. Now, these guys are interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes them different?
Well, they're all about challenging authority, fighting injustice, even if it means breaking the rules.
So, like, causing chaos.
Not necessarily. It's more like they have this strong sense of right and wrong, and they're not afraid to fight for what they believe in.
Even if it ruffles some feathers.
Exactly. They're disruptive, for sure, but often their actions are about exposing hypocrisy, fighting for the little guy.
Okay, so less about being evil, more about being, well, rebellion.
Exactly, like a demonic Robin Hood. Right.
I like that analogy. Stealing from the corrupt, giving to the oppressed.
Right. But just like Robin Hood, these rebellious demons, they're often seen as the villains by those in power.
Because they're shaking things up.
Exactly. It makes you think about how we label people who challenge the status quo, right? Dangerous, radical, even when they're fighting for positive change.
It's wild, right? How these demon stories, even the fictional ones, they show us how we act in the real world.
It's like looking in a mirror almost.
Yeah, exactly.
When we talk about demonization, it's not just about like creatures and myths. It's about how we treat each other, how we turn on each other.
We decide someone's the enemy, and suddenly they're a monster.
It's scarily easy to do. We see it all the time, right?
Wow.
Politics, social movements, even just people with different opinions. It's like we can't handle different viewpoints.
So instead of listening, we go straight to demon.
And that's the danger zone.
Yeah.
Because once someone's labeled that way, it's almost impossible to come back from.
Yeah, it's like that label sticks no matter what. You've got a whole section on this contemporary demonization thing.
Mm.
What are some examples of that? Like, how does this play out today?
Well, think about cancel culture. It's a whole thing, right?
Yeah, it's everywhere these days.
And look, I know it's complicated, but the basic idea, right, it's about holding people accountable for their past, even if they've apologized, changed, whatever.
So no second chances, basically.
Kind of, yeah. It's like this instant judgment, no room for growth or redemption. Very demonic when you think about it.
We decide someone's bad, and that's it. End of story.
Exactly. And it's not just individuals either. Whole groups get demonized too. Think about how we talk about, I don't know, immigrants, activists, even entire religions sometimes.
It's easier to point the finger than try to understand. Right.
It's way easier to make assumptions and spread fear. And that's how we end up with these toxic us versus them narratives.
Which just makes everything worse, really.
So really. And that's where, like, self-awareness is so important.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, like, are we part of the problem? Are we quick to judge? Do we even get all the facts before we decide someone's the enemy?
Those are tough questions, man.
They are, but they're important if we want to change things.
So how do we do that? How do we stop this demonization thing?
Honestly, it starts with listening.
Listening.
Yeah, like really listening, even to people we disagree with, even when it's hard. We have to remember everyone has their own story, their own humanity.
Instead of just assuming the worst.
Exactly. What if, instead of jumping to judgment, we tried to understand?
Choose empathy over, like, anger.
Totally. Because the world isn't black and white. People are complicated. And even those we want to label as demons, they might surprise us.
They might just turn out to be human after all.
Exactly. And isn't that a more interesting, hopeful way to live?
Definitely gives me something to think about.
You too.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with me. This was eye-opening, for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.